Hello everyone on YouTube. Hello everyone here in Discord. How are you doing today on this lovely, lovely Thursday? Apologies for the late start. Being a small business owner is hard, and Operation Inflation is not a very simple thing. For those of you who are unaware, we're basically at operationinflation.com. You can go over. $35 buys an inflatable costume that will be delivered to protesters. And various people around Portland, just maybe in a specific area, because it is the best way to make this really look as stupid as it is. When they're like, look at these violent protesters, and it's everyone in masks and baseball caps and black outfits, and or they say, look at these evil protesters attacking ICE, and it's a bunch of guys in costumes dancing. It hits different. No matter where you're at in the world, it hits fucking way different. So that's where we're at, and that's what we're trying to do. But for today, a little bit different of a beast. Today, we are talking about Nietzsche and the vicious circle from Pierre Klossowski. And it is, it's its own thing. Let me make sure I've got, all right. Look at that. Look at that. Everything's running. Everything's working well. Happy, happy day. My brain's a little bit slower this morning as it happens, and it does happen this way sometimes. What can I say? We're making our way through the second chapter, I believe, making our way through to the third. We're on page 38. We've got a decent amount to go left in here, and let me make sure I've got this set up. Good. Where do I want to leave us off from last week? Where do I want to lead us? Where do I want to lead us? Where were we? Where were we? No, YouTube. I will not be covering the Hassan drama with his dog. Moments on stream defining a person's life so we can judge them. I adore that this is how leftist communities behave. It's great. It's my favorite thing. Pierre Klossowski in Nietzsche and the Vicious Circle spent the first section of the book sort of talking through a wonderful biography of Nietzsche, working through Nietzsche's writings qua Nietzsche. And that's really the fundamental thing Klossowski is trying to do. Rather than taking a secondary approach or a textual approach, purely textual approach to Nietzsche, Pierre Klossowski has decided instead, hey, what if we take Nietzsche at his word, that he believes and he writes and says that which we produce is us, that the forces are working, the impulses, the forces of things, we are the battleground of, and out the other side, we reveal kind of what those are. There's a process there. And if there's a process there, can't we then take also what Nietzsche's going through bodily, what Nietzsche's going through in his life, add those to his texts and make that textual reading much thicker, deeper, more, I would argue, interesting, odd, and really play through a handful of things, and really change sort of what it means when we talk about when Nietzsche talks about his high tonality of the soul, or as he's talking about the sickness and health, the way that he goes through it, the way he experiences it. If we talk about these things in terms of what he's actually going through, there's something far more profound to be done with his works. Far more profound. And that's, if I had to argue, probably where we mentally need to start with. 1 second. Why is this in the wrong spot? This is frustrating. Sorry, apologies, everyone. 1 moment. Boop, boop, boop. There. And then this moves over there. Good. So we're going to start. We're in the middle of, we had a very long paragraph. And I'm not going to really revisit it because we're just in the middle of these things. And we're just going to keep fucking going because I'm not in the mood to, spend all that time revisiting the last paragraph that already itself took a long time. I want to read the end of it because the end of it will lead into this next paragraph. And since the paragraph is just so absolutely stunningly short. It's kind of necessary. So let's do that, and then I'm going to read directly into the second paragraph, and then we'll analyze and spend time on both. If everyone's good with that, I'm going to start. Nietzsche knows, for example, as he writes his notes on the impulses, that such impulses are acting in him, but there is no accord between the observations he is transcribing and the impulses that have compelled him to write them. But if he is conscious of what he is writing as the agent named Nietzsche, it is because he knows not only that he is ignorant of what has just occurred in order for him write, but also that he must be ignorant of it if he wants to write and think. At that very moment, he is necessarily ignorant of what he is about to call the combat of the impulses among themselves. Even if he stops writing, even if he tries to stop thinking, could we say that he is therefore abandoning himself to the unconscious in the form of an extravagant reverie? This is one aspect of the phenomenon that would lead Nietzsche to try to specify the relationship between the conscious agent and the so-called unconscious activity of the impulses in relation to this agent. For it is the agent that is unconscious of this subterranean activity. His inquiry would be taken in the hope of demonstrating that morality, which lies at the origin of every investigation, will be arrested only when it destroys its own foundation. Nietzsche pursues his inquiry in order to make himself finally admit that there is neither subject, nor object, nor will, nor aim, nor meaning, nor not only at the origin, but for now and always. Nietzsche's idea of drives, of impulses, of Triebe, is the German word for it, which I'm not pronouncing correctly, but this thing that he's playing with, and this thing that he's working with, Klossowski here is taking obviously incredibly seriously, like wildly seriously. The whole point of this is kind of that first sentence, where he has the conscious and so-called unconscious activity of impulses. There is some scare quotes in there. If you're not seeing the text, you should be able to see the text. But it's the conscious agent and the so-called unconscious activity. This is playing around with. It's hinting at what's coming. This is that Nietzsche is not exactly super into binaries. Nietzsche isn't super into these things, but it's playing into and sort of setting up for us what will become later. This is stuff from Beyond Good and Evil. This is stuff from Genealogy of Morals. This is all of these things. This is commentary and critique from Klossowski, sort of bringing these things about. The core of this is talking about the so-called agent, conscious or not, the way that they interplay, the way that they set up for it is this agent that is unconscious of the subterranean activity. This is how people talk about themselves today. This is how people talked about themselves back then. This is how so many thinkers that Nietzsche and even Klossowski, but definitely Nietzsche has had to deal with, consider things, that we have this consciousness that we're absolutely aware of, that we are aware of what's happening. And there is an unconscious activity that is dealing with stuff in regards to that agent. This is more or less Klossowski just sort of revisiting and restating a handful of those things. For Nietzsche, though, his inquiry would be undertaken in the hope of demonstrating that morality, which lies at the origin of every investigation, will be arrested only when it destroys its own foundation. These are crisp sentences. I feel like I shouldn't be really explaining these because this is like just laying the groundwork of what's going to be coming up here. Nietzsche is laying groundwork. Nietzsche is working within his inquiry here. Everything he's doing is trying to destroy the foundation of how this odd morality that sort of plays with these things, this epistemic condition of good and evil, the moral. I obviously he wrote a book called this, but the thing that's happening is when we critique, when we have an inquiry, when we do stuff in sort of this vein, there is always a value judgment about things that matter when we start. Deleuze writes about this, Klossowski as well. Lots of great writers talk about sort of the way that the problem builds its own solution, and how we build the problem and set it up sort of creates that. This is that type of thing that Klossowski is bringing out here. If we have a presupposed value judgment that is implicit in it, seeking truth, for example, as a thing, conditions so much more of what we are considering. And that thing that is being done here, his inquiry will be undertaken in the hope of demonstrating morality, which lies at the origin of every investigation, will be arrested only when it destroys its own. The way for morality to stop its own investigation when it reaches the abyss of groundlessness, when it is doing this, and also able to be potentially, through autocritique, sort of destroyed through itself. Yeah. August? Ben? I'm going to leave it open. I know your fuckers are there. Sorry, cooking? I'll take that as a compliment, and not that you're actually cooking some food, that you think I'm cooking. Excellent. And then the last sentence. Nietzsche pursues his inquiry in order to make himself finally admit there is neither subject nor object nor will nor aim nor meaning, not only at the origin, but for now and always. So there is so much stacked in here, but again, this is just to burn through sort of Nietzsche. This is how I have my notes set up. The subject, there is no substantial self. This is genealogy of morals and beyond good and evil. An object, no mind-independent things in themselves. No, my hand. There's no object for Nietzsche. Like there's that's not it. This would be a mind-independent thing. I am aware that there's a hand. You're seeing my hand. Now that I've said hand, you're aware of it. But is there a mind? Is there a hand? Is there an object independent of mind? No. No. Again, beyond good and evil. This is all beyond good and evil.
I mean, this is all linked back very neatly to both Bergson and the Hume. There's a Bergson discussion earlier today about images. For Bergson, what is an image versus what is a representation or an object, right? And like Bergson's position on the idealism versus realism debate. And Bergson also kind of holds there are neither sort of like objects nor anything independent of the mind. And that's also, we see kind of like Hume here. Also, his inquiry would be undertaken in the hope of demonstrating that morality, which lies at the origin of every investigation, will be arrested only when it destroys its own foundation. It's a very Humean critique, right? Like, above all, Hume was a moralist and a sociologist. His first work was subtitled like an essay on human nature. And this is his same critique of skepticism, right? Like, skepticism can only serve to kind of like undermine and undo certainty. And the same thing here with like moral investigations. Like, everything is morality until you kind of like have to like destroy that foundation to move past it.
I don't have a ton there to add. The only thing I'll say is because the next bit is going to be significant, we're into another 3-page paragraph that is not small and has an extraordinary amount again in it. This is, I would say, I would argue, this is a bit of a hint. Klossowski's outlining stuff for us of the various things that are going to be taken apart, and that Nietzsche is going to be taken apart and how he's doing it, and sort of the practice of it. There's a practical side to this that's really kind of amazing. But I think, by the way, anytime you hear Ben talk, if he's not mentioning empiricism and subjectivity, it's not Ben, it's a fraud. But it's the things he's going through and sort of aiming at. There's no object, no will. The idea of a will, we have to be very specific about it because obviously there's the will to power, like the phrasing of it, but the will, aim, or meaning, the will is like this unified will, that you have a will. There is a Brooks will, or a Ben willing, or a will if your name's Will. I want to say will again. Then there's also the aim, or telos. There is no aim, destiny. There's no destiny, right? That, oh, there's an aim of evolution. Oh, evolution's trying to build this. No, doesn't really have an aim. Doesn't have a purpose. And meaning itself is kind of obliterated as well through Nietzsche. That there is no intrinsic significance to things. It's all interpretations of interpretations. Okay? Any questions, any thoughts, anything anyone wants to add here before I dive forward? Let's check the YouTubes. Yes, fuck teleology. Useless stuff. All right. Fair enough. Then we will keep moving. This is a long one. Bear with me. That's it. Just please bear with me. It would be lovely if you could just bear with me on this one. The notions of consciousness and unconsciousness, which are derived from what is responsible or irresponsible. I'm just going to stop there because it's a great line. When we talk about the unconscious, we tend to not talk about it being responsible for things. The conscious person is the one who we assign guilt to. It's the one who chooses. The chooser is the one who is responsible for the action. The unconscious, less so. We pull this from the responsible or irresponsible. There's so many good lines. I'm not going to do that again. Just it's a great opening. Always presuppose the unity of the person of the ego, of the subject, a purely institutional distinction, which is why it plays such an important role in psychiatric considerations. From the outset, this unity appears as little more than a flickering memory, maintained exclusively by the designations of the everyday code which intervene in accordance with changing excitations, upon which they impose their own linkages, in order to conceal the total discontinuity of our state. What then is forgetfulness? It is the occultation. Occultation? I need to know how to pronounce this word. Occultation. Occultation. I pronounced it correctly. Occultation. I learned a new word today. I like that. I know I've read this, but that's never stuck with me. Occultation. I think it's easier to read than to say it loud. It is the occultation of the signs. We use to designate the groups of events that are being lived through or thought at a given moment, whether near or far. But what is it that occults this series of signs? Occultation is the state of being hidden from view. The occult is something that's hidden, that has a veil cast over it. Right? That's kind of the idea. That are being lived through or thought at a given moment, whether near or far. But what is it that occults this series of signs, if not the afflux of another excitation at another moment, which absorbs all the available designations, while the rest of our general apparatus is put into abeyance? Either everything in us is unconscious, or everything in us is conscious. In the latter case, however, there would be a simultaneous activation of all the available signs, which would provoke a generalized insomnia. In the former case, only a minuscule portion of the signs would be active, and they would be too weak to have the slightest influence on what takes place in our depth. Our depth is governed by a completely different system of designations, for which there is neither outside nor inside. The fact remains that we are possessed, abandoned, possessed again, and surprised, sometimes by the system of impulsive designations, and at other times... Why is this slowly going down? Stop doing that. Sorry, 2 seconds. My stupid fucking thing is getting all busted. There. The fact remains that we are possessed, abandoned, possessed again and surprised, sometimes by the system of impulsive designations, at other times by the system of everyday signs. It is the former that confronts us, invades us, and will remain long after we disappear. Outside of it, we are little, much, nothing, depending on whether we appeal to the everyday code or not. Within it, no one knows, nor would anyone know how to know, what is being designated within us. For even when we are alone, silent, speaking internally to ourselves, it is still the outside that is speaking to us, thanks to these signs from the exterior that invade and occupy us, and whose murmuring totally covers over our impulsive life. Even our innermost recesses, even our so-called inner life, is still the residue of signs instituted from the outside under the pretext of signifying us in an objective and impartial manner, a residue that no doubt takes on the configuration of the impulsive movement characteristic of each person, and follows the contours of our ways of reacting to this invasion of signs, which we have not invented ourselves. Then what is our consciousness? Where does that leave our unconscious? We cannot even look for it in our dreams, for here again, if everything on the other side of the waking state were reconstructed, this would simply be the same system of signs this would simply be the same system of signs of the everyday code being put to a different use. It is because of the difference between this use and the use that prevails in the waking state that we can more or less recall our dreams afterwards and relate the strange worlds or words of strange banality that are offered there through us or through other figures. With strange words, not worlds, sorry. Moreover, in the waking state, we are capable of uttering things of the same type, whether in jest or through fatigue, or through some other disturbance. When someone tells us that we are dreaming out loud, it means that something impulsive has shaken or upset the code of everyday signs. We have been surprised by our unconscious. But this is nothing. Even for someone to say this to us, the use of everyday signs is required by the interlocutor. Or even if it is a psychiatrist, this implies that we are totally dependent on everyday code, even when we let ourselves be surprised by our unconscious, which, at the very least, will learn how to use the code in order to play with it and twist it around, as it pleases, even when we make fun of the psychiatrist and conceal our desire to be cured. This is why the strange behavior that would result would be, in most cases, nothing but a ruse. But a ruse of what? Whew. So there was a lot.
I want to note about the fatigue, right? And the impulses and the signs, right?
Mm-hmm.
What Klossowski mean by the signs, right? Is it like
signifiers, signs every day, like the signs of meaning, signifiers, signified signs. He means signs in that sense.
Yeah, where it's coming from? Yeah, I know, but where it come from? It come from the unconscious or conscious, because like
Well,
he
that's
comment
what this is
about,
about.
yeah.
That's what he's kind of like, through Nietzsche. He's making his own point here very much, and we'll kind of get through this, but he's making the comment that, like, how do you do that? How do you claim one or the other is the one where the signs come from, or that this is dominant or dependent, or that this is the one in control? One sec. There's a lot in this, but just to go through this. Either everything in us is unconscious or everything in us is conscious. Just run with this. If, in the latter case, everything in us is conscious, however, there would be an activation of all the available signs, which would provoke a generalized insomnia, a constant waking state. All the signs constantly running. But in the former, where everything in us is unconscious, in the former, only a minuscule portion of the signs would be active. They would be too weak to have the slightest influence on what takes place in the depths. And the depths, they're governed by different designations. He's going through the process of how the way that these things function and how they work. He's actually going through the process. He's not going to answer your question until the next paragraph. Sorry. But he will answer it shortly. But he's going through kind of how meaning is generated, and how these things sort of come about. We're going to go sentence by sentence. Let me know when we don't. But let me know. Is that okay, Marcellus?
Yeah, because it's very important, because there's a similar argument in chapter 1 about the signs in Deleuze, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the work of signs and the passive synthesis and the habit and the two repetitions and all blah, 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 all these kind of things. There's a important argument, right?
Yes. And I how I read this, I'm just to sort of color, and I think I've said it before. It's clear Klossowski and Deleuze were very close, which they were, and it's extremely clear that they're both working with the same things, but utilizing different processes and ways of describing it, and talking through it and reasoning it. And because what you're talking about is is the vicious circle, but Klossowski here is starting to lay the groundwork for how the signs gain meaning in this process, or how they work. He's trying to, through Nietzsche, and Nietzsche does this as well, destroy this very simplified idea that Lacan had, or Freud came from before, or Nietzsche was dealing with at his time thanks to the Enlightenment. This idea that there was like this unconscious is kind of all the stuff like rolling around, and then you consciously select and react to the world, you do stuff, and then out come the signs, and they're put together. Like he's dismantling those so we can go, it's not about conscious or unconscious. That binary is the thing we're going to be eliminating. And we're going to be having a completely different discussion in general. And this is sort of setting that up. Chapter 3 is where we're going to be actually hitting the vicious circle, the eternal return, and Klossowski's interpretation of it. All of this is groundwork for that. So he's not going to necessarily explain yet, but he's going to start hinting at things he's going to be saying in chapter 3. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
okay.
It makes sense.
So, that opening sentence, which I did stop on, the notions of consciousness and unconsciousness, which are derived from what is responsible or irresponsible, presuppose the unity of the person, of the ego, of the subject, a purely institutional distinction. So if we go back, genealogy of morals, the way that the distinction of conscious and unconscious came from, where it came from is specifically this juridical moral category of responsibility, this demand that someone be responsible, of the question of whether or not someone is responsible. From this, who did this? You? From there, you develop this setup of conscious or unconscious, responsible or irresponsible. The psychological terminology is downstream from the institutional, legal, social distinction. It's downstream from that. And the reason that this is this purely institutional distinction is because there is not really it's not really a metaphysical claim it's not really natural either. Consciousness is a social technology, we could say, for responsibility generation or for hooking responsibility into something. The genealogy 2, where he's talking about memory, promising, the production of the calculable subjects. This is where Klossowski's pulling this from. And there's some really great language in this sentence where he's basically dealing with the person, the ego, the subject. That it's a repetition intentionally. He's showing that there is this redundancy in these things. The person, ego, and subject, these are not three things. Even though they have different signifiers and signs, they're one fiction that is utilized in these different ways to build this institutional scaffolding at the baseline of it. Right? So then he goes on to say, which is why it plays such an important role in psychiatric considerations. You need, in order to be able to diagnose someone, in order to be able to charge someone with a crime, in order to be able to say someone is bad, evil, broken, sick, whatever it is, you need, for that psychiatric consideration, you need a unified subject. You need someone you can treat, someone you can deal with. And again, Klossowski's not against the idea of the ability of us to talk, but when I say, yeah, Marcellus, that makes sense. I'm talking to you. There's the need for me to do that, the institutional need, the social need needs this thing of the Marcellus, the Brooks, the Ben, the August, whatever it may be. This thing that's happening is built in. The discipline that comes with that depends on the fiction that it's apparently analyzing and critiquing, right? So he goes on. From the outset, this unity appears as little more than a flickering memory, maintained exclusively by the designations of everyday code, which intervene in accordance with changing excitations upon which they impose their own linkages in order to conceal the total discontinuity of our state. Fuck, it's a big sentence. It's also a really, really fucking good critique, I think. And I want to figure out, I don't want to make like one sentence like everything, but goddamn, it's so good. Okay. From the outset, this unity, the unity of the person, the ego, the subject, appears as little more than this flickering memory. There is a unstable reality to the ego, to who you are. It is itself something that requires being continually rebuilt. There is no you substance, to use like Spinoza terms, but instead it's a process of inscription or reinscription that happens. It's kind of actually like someone mentioned Bergson earlier, but this is kind of like a flip on that. It's not that memory grounds continuity. It's a defense against discontinuity. It's an active process. They impose their own linkages in order to conceal the total discontinuity of our state. The linkages of everyday code has an artificial continuity built into it. It produces a supposed continuity. Yeah. So, like for example, that I can say, "Hey, Marcellus, how are you doing today?" It's me saying that the signs of all of this are so consistently sort of rebuilt and reused and link into each other so much that it's done in a way that actually covers over the fact that there is no continuity. This is Derridian sounds cooler than probably anyone would say. It's a Derrida, whatever. The trace in Derrida is this. The memory, things like that we can play with, but it is about institutional function first. Because for Nietzsche, the social is where we find that repression, and it forces the will to change. It rebuilds things, and it sets it up. And so we have this really odd shift where it's, instead of thinking about like pure ontological structure, we should be thinking about institutional functionality. And the thing that it does is by implying that there is a continuity in us by building that, by having signs that link each other in this way. And it covers up whatever's underneath it. Well, underneath it, since it is continuity, it is the abyss of discontinuity, chaos, total chaos. That there is no, and this is a big statement, and it's going to be through the book, so just enjoy that. There is no such thing as a psychological continuity. There's nothing like that. It is only a semiotic fabrication that creates a layer that pretends that that's there or covers over it. This is what Deleuze does with Hume. Like Hume has and Deleuze talks about this in Empiricism and Subjectivity, but there is a weak continuity that Hume is playing with. The idea that resemblance or causation connects various things. Nietzsche wants to even obliterate this. It is a radical discontinuity that's happening here. It's a radical discontinuity that he's playing with here. The other phrasing in here it's because it's, again, if it's in italics, there's a reason he's putting emphasis, but it's the changing excitations. The designations of the everyday code which intervene in accordance with changing excitations, upon which they impose their own linkages. Underneath this stabilization, there are all of the impulses fucking around in battle and doing their thing. The excitation, the changing excitations, which I really like the wording there, is the moment-to-moment result of those things. The moment-to-moment bursts of it, the flux of things underneath the semiotic stabilization that the code gives us. This thing that's happening, this tension between these excitations and signs, this is really important. Only in the mind, at least for ENS? Yes. Again, ENS, different thing. I'm just saying, like, Hume had this thing about resemblances and all of that. And yes, this breaks any kind of discussion about consciousness. Yes, it does, Estelle. This changes, again, it's not about conscious or unconscious. It's about eliminating those categories for Nietzsche. It's about eliminating those. And then we get to forgetfulness is my favorite Nietzschean thing that I wish more people would focus on, but we'll continue. What then is forgetfulness? It is the occultation of signs that designate the groups of events that are being lived through or thought at a given moment. Oh, that's so great. Whether near or far. Okay. Let me say that again all at once. Sorry, I just got... my brain ran with it. What is forgetfulness? It is the occultation of the signs we use to designate the groups of events that are being lived through or thought at a given moment, whether near or far. So forgetfulness is not the absence of memory. We tend to think of memory as being what we keep and forgetfulness being gone. But it's not really that for what we're talking about here. It's not really that for Nietzsche either. It isn't really that, but it's instead an eclipse of designatory signs. It is semiotic rather than psychological. It is not that forgetfulness is you just lose all of it. No, not really. You keep the effective. You hold, like, forgetfulness is just getting rid of the signs. And it's this thing that occults it. It's this thing that hides it. Estelle says, I'm on a philosophy subreddit a lot. Well, that's your problem. We'll just start there. There's so much discussion about consciousness. Yeah, because people don't read books. That's why Bad Philosophy for a while was the best place, because it was all like postdocs and professors, and it got taken over by a bunch of useless people. But for a while it was like just everyone like, I just hate philosophy. I do it for a living, but I hate it. Like, That's much more akin to where people end up, because it's occultation. It's eclipsing. It's temporary blockages. To occultize is to cover over, the way that an eclipse happens, where the Earth blocks the light from the sun to the moon, or the moon blocks the sun's light to the Earth. It's the occult, occultation. It's such a fucking good word. But it's not permanent destruction of it. And the signs still exist. The signs even if we forget, the signs still exist. They're still there, but they aren't active. They're not visible. They're not set up in that way. So think instead of traditionally how we talk about it, in like psychoanalytic repression, is that unconscious forces push content down into us, right? And that the content disappears into the abyss, and we lose it. What if it's just the shifting of the semiotics that's actually doing this? What if it's covering up this? And that's where they go. But what is it that occults this series of signs, if not the afflex of another excitation at another moment, which absorbs all the available designations, while the rest of our general apparatus is put into abeyance? There's kind of a what is it that occults this series of signs, if not the afflux of another excitation? The afflux, this you'll know this if you've listened to my AO stuff. This is afflux is a bursting forward, a flowing for an invasion, an afflux. Vomiting. Vomiting's an afflux, comes an afflux. The bursting is the big deal. It's an excitation. And this excitation competes for semiotic resources. This is an economic read of experience, as I read it, just so you know. I read this as being deeply, deeply, deeply economic. The idea being like signs are limited resources. There isn't actually an infinite system of them. This is not how really meaning works. There isn't just forever meaning that will always keep going and going and going. That's not the setup. There's only so many. And the process of this, of assigning these, of something taking them, the excitation that competes for these resources, but then also the general apparatus in abeyance, this idea of this suspension of it rather than a depth of the unconscious. What if it's just an abeyance? Again, economic terminology throughout this. The involuntary affective economy, where excitations require signs to register and be felt, but signs also constrain or shape what is capable of being felt. So if we have this project as it's set up here, it's not a conscious and unconscious interacting, or a superego ego, or any of this shit. It's there are signs available, there are only so many, and the affective excitations jump to them, use them, and of course are then sort of handled by them, I think would be the phrasing I'd probably use. Conditioned by them. Yeah. And that's where they go, and he starts diving into that larger thing. It's everything is either in us as unconscious, or everything in us is conscious. In the latter, there would be a simultaneous activation of all signs, which would provoke a generalized insomnia. It's the phrasing's interesting, but it's this idea of like a pathological overstimulation, a generalized insomnia, a ADHD on steroids, you might say, like this way of this consciousness that doesn't forget. It would constantly be using all the signs all the time and have things for it. It's madness. It is not health. That thing. Normal consciousness has partial occlusion, right? Occultation, which is such a great word. And in the former case, only a minuscule portion of the signs would be active, and they would be too weak to have the slightest influence on what takes place in our depth. Our depth governed by a completely different system of designation for which there is neither inside or outside. So this is, on the one hand, if all of the signs and everything if we had full consciousness, it would actually make us unable to ever forget. We would be aware of everything. Total consciousness is overstimulation, generalized insomnia is the phrasing he uses. On the other hand, if the phrasing he uses, if everything in us is unconscious, if everything in us is unconscious, then only a minuscule portion of the signs would be active. Because consciousness is kind of a narrow bandwidth. It's not this repressive lid over the vast unconsciousness, right? It'd be the opposite. And so we end up in a very different place. We end up in this idea of, and someone mentioned depth psychology on YouTube. This is kind of a mocking it, honestly, because it's the idea of like, hey, there is depth, but it's not unconscious in this psychological sense. It's something completely different. It's not pre-linguistic drives that are awaiting symbolization, like something Lacan would say or Freud would say, but it is its own semiotic system entirely. This is why he uses terms in this, and Nietzsche does too, this idea of the impulsive designations versus everyday code. These things are different. These things set up differently. These things play differently for them. And it's the D&G have basically their entire book, Anti-Oedipus, also 1,000 Plateaus, but absolutely the way that they critique the idea of this depths of the unconscious, as if there is stuff playing there, the stage of all of that. They're very much in the same place. So if you've got that down, generally we're talking about this. This is the same kind of thing, because there is the impulsive system, the impulses, the forces, is not in us, as opposed to signs that are outside of us. That's not how this works for Klossowski or Nietzsche. Both of them are actually exterior to any substantial self. Ultimately, it's neither outside nor inside. It's completely different in that sense. Completely different way of dealing with it. So they go on to say, the fact remains that we are possessed, abandoned, possessed again, and surprised, sometimes by the system of impulsive designations, other times by the system of everyday signs. The impulsive designations and everyday signs. Because again, it's a different semiotics entirely. Reminds me of some of the logic of sense stuff. Yes. It's very much the philosophy of the depths, the philosophy of the heights, or the surface, and even how he regards the depths is very different here. But yeah, it's you can see these guys obviously talk more than a few times. I think Klossowski dedicated a few books to Deleuze, actually. But there's this possession, abandoned, and possessed again. This is not a sovereign subjectivity that we're talking about here, or that Nietzsche's talking about. It's not making choice. No. It's the fact remains we are possessed, abandoned, possessed again, and surprised. We are afterwards. We're looking back and like, oh, we're watching our own occupation, our own colonialism, and we're not actually in control. We're surprised when this happens. It's really great language around it. We are possessed, abandoned, possessed again, and surprised. These things grab us, control us, then leave us, then come back, like this back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. This is this is the impulses for Klossowski. This is simulacra for Klossowski. He's playing into a handful of things he uses here. He's playing into some of his language. The possessed, he talks about demons. He doesn't mean it quite literally, but he's very, very poetic with some of the ways he goes about stuff. I just really like it. But again, you'll see we have two systems. And there is this economy between them. It's not a conscious or unconscious setup. It is impulsive designations and everyday signs. Everyday signs is easy. That's the social code of institutions that we experience. The impulsive designations is drive signs, physiological affective signs. These are different. These play differently, and we don't choose between them. They possess or abandon us. This is not an agency play. It is the former that confronts us, invades us, and will remain long after we disappear. So, impulsive designations invade us, confront us. These are, if there is a primacy, this is the deal. This is the stuff that's beyond individualized experience or individual or personal forces or a consciousness, whatever you may call it. It's impersonal and pre-individual forces. This is will to power. This is will to power. This is will to power. But there's a phrasing I just want to, that sticks to me for this. There's a form that confronts us, invades us, and will remain long after we disappear. Stick with that and remember that, because again, there is no eternal subject. There is no eternal you or ego. So what is it that he's referring to here? Hint, 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 pay attention, hint, 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 hint. The former that confronts us, invades us, and will remain long after we disappear. Outside of it, we are little, much, nothing, depending on whether we appeal to the everyday code or not. Within it, no one knows, nor would anyone know how to know what is being designated within us. Outside of it, we are little, much, nothing. Will this be on the test? No, of life, sure. Outside everyday signs, we are not existent. Really, we're effectively nothing. Outside of everyday signs, like what's the thing we are? Not really anything. Yeah. Again, the impulsive system. Outside of it, the impulsive system is itself mostly unknowable. And this is, again, not because it's unconscious and sitting in some abyss or some shit like that, but it's because knowing requires everyday code. Everyday code falsifies what it designates, covers over the entire process with this layer of chains of meaning. And that's the deal. So to know this impulsive system, we have to use everyday signs, the common parlance and all of that, which then transforms this impulsive system and betrays it. By measuring it, we've changed the outcome. By measuring it, we've changed the outcome. So it's Heisenberg for philosophy. By measuring it, we've changed the outcome or changed what it was. Because the unconscious doesn't have that shit. So using everyday science to talk about it, we fuck it up. We transform it, we betray it. And this is drastically different than other, especially philosophies of Nietzsche's time or before, or I mean, honestly, a lot of things. When we start talking about the noumena and Kant, I've been getting into Kant over the last year. Not into him, but like reading him because he's really important to Deleuze. Incredibly important to Deleuze. and this is kind of one of the reasons that Deleuze does the critique with him, what he does in his book on Kant. He wrote a book on Kant. And there's this really imminent unknowability to things. And so it's kind of similar. It plays differently, but it's kind of a interesting play there. Again, this is where Deleuze takes it, but sorry, I can't help it. For even when we are alone, silent, speaking internally to ourselves, it is still the outside that is speaking to us. Yeah. Let me reread that. For even when we are all alone, silent, speaking internally to ourselves, it is still the outside that is speaking to us, thanks to these signs from the exterior that invade and occupy us, and whose murmuring totally covers over our impulsive life. There is no interiority, not an authentic, separate one. No, all man is an island thing. Even when we're alone, speaking internally, even when it's we seem separated, it's actually the outside that is speaking to us, thanks to these signs that invade and occupy. He's using colonial language very intentionally here, by the way. But this is just saying there's no such thing as like an authentic interiority. Even your inner speech is colonized by these external signs and processes and systems and things. And the phrasing is great here. Thanks to these signs from the exterior that invade and occupy us, whose murmuring covers over impulsive life. This is actually Maurice Blanchot. It's another term that a fantastic concept that not enough people pick up on. The murmur. The murmur for Blanchot is this like anonymous sort of continuous noise that you exist. And as you think you exist and as you experience life, there's a background noise that exists that constitutes what makes you feel like a subject or a person or a unique ego. That background noise is what Blanchot calls murmuring, the murmur of subjectivity. And it's really an interesting concept. I hear someone wanting to talk. I thought I did.
When I watch Pete Headset doing this silly speech, right? Mm-hmm. There's a voice in the teleprompter in the TV. There's a certain voice, right? That is kind of a certain voice. Like I kind of like, is that what like they talking about? Like murmuring, like certain. So
the murmur is the murmuring is the. I only have like really weird ways to explain it, so I'm going to try. As you're watching, as you're dealing with the world, and there are signs that are constantly invading, think of it, and I think people do experience it this way, but think of it as an invasion, an afflux of these signs of all the signs coming in. But there isn't a person who's giving it. It is anonymous. It is consistently anonymous, but it is continuous linguistic noise. And that is the thing, the murmur for Blanchot that constitutes subjectivity. And that's like the glue that keeps everything else. So when you're not talking and you're not actively doing stuff, but you're kind of, dealing with something, even if you're dealing with it internally, you're not talking with other people. That thing, that background noise is keeping you as a singular subject.
Yeah, it's kind of a weird experience in the living room. Like, not to hear this, like, but after you kind of like left off someone, right? Mm-hmm. There's some kind of murmuring that happened. I don't know. It's not a psychological, but kind of you kind of feel their words, right? They're kind of you kind of feel, or I don't know.
So again, no, and it's the thing to remember with this, and it's again, I don't have any other way to read Nietzsche now that I've read this, and I can't see anything but Klossowski always talking about it. But when you're talking about this, we aren't talking about the inner experience and external experience. What we're talking about is the consistent experience. And the experience that's happening is as you're right beforehand, you're here, you're talking to me and we're chatting, and you are able to, like, subjectivity is being reformed constantly as you're utilizing signs and code of everyday life to have this conversation, and other people are using it to take it in, and they're engaged. When you're engaged and dealing with that, this is more this active system, but it is not a consciousness. It is not your conscious self that's doing it, versus the next moment where you put on pig headset and you're just watching, and you're just like even in the silences or whatever, you're just staring, you're like, what? And you're just, ugh. But there's a background noise because those signs, not just the ones he's saying, but all of it, everything that exists is constantly throwing signs at you. And so this process itself, the whirring of machines, yes, exactly, August, the murmuring of this linguistic noise, what it's doing is completely occultating, covering over. This is not partial, total covering over of the impulsive life. And this is, again, impulsive life is inaccessible from within consciousness, because consciousness is the covering over it. So it's not that you have two versions of yourself that exist. It's always that setup, because it is being covered over by the signifiers, by the signs, by the everyday code. And even when you're not talking, even when you're alone, silent, speaking internally, not watching Pete Hegseth, staring at the wall and considering your day, or not considering, or just sort of zoning out, the outside still speaks to you, because the signs from that exterior invade and occupy you, and their murmuring covers over the impulsive life. And there's no way he's not using which is Blanchot's big deal for this. There's 100% he's making reference to it. And so you have this sort of odd interplay that, again, just to keep going, even our innermost resources, even our so-called inner life, is still the residue of signs instituted from the outside under the pretext of signifying us in an objective and impartial manner. Even the innermost parts, there is no inner and outside. This is the categories themselves are flawed. The categories are flawed from the ground up in every single way. Inner life is a residue. It's a residue of signs instituted. I love that. It's leftovers. It's a waste product of external signification. This is, again, reversing the traditional conversation that external signs express inner states. No, not really as a setup here. It's instead more that external signs produce inner life as remainder, as an accursed share of sorts. And this thing, this residue that's in the pretext of signifying us, again, institutional signification is the center of this claim to describe things objectively and to have truth behind it, but actually constitute what they describe. It is performative through and through. And it's not the things that instate things. That's signifying us in an objective and impartial manner. Again, the objective and impartial is being referred to here is this sort of ideological stance where I'm an impartial observer. I'm just aware. I'm objectively looking at these things. I'm aware of all of this stuff. I've got it going. Don't worry about it. And it's like, no, this is the ideological function these things do. This is what scientists run into. This is the judicial process, the medical discourse. All of this shit has neutrality. But they're actually producing subjects, or are subjects themselves being produced through this. This is Foucault. Foucault's idea that power and knowledge produce subjects that they claim to merely observe. This is Bruno Latour's Laboratory Life. If you haven't read it, you should. The way that the objective and impartial creates all, and actually creates the subjects that they're supposedly objective over, is the point. There is no break here. There is no break here. There's no separation. There is this constant process, and this external leaving this residue. And he goes on just because I have to. A residue that no doubt takes on the configuration of the impulsive movement characteristic of each person, follows the contours of our ways of reacting to the invasion of signs, which we have not invented ourselves. The external signs don't create a blank slate. What they do is they interact with this impulsive singularity, the impulsive movement characteristic of each person. That this would be a singularity of sorts, the movement characteristic of each person, following the contours of ways of reacting. Because again, everyone's not an identical subject. We're not all identical in experience or production or anything, obviously. But there is this thing, and there are patterns of this drive organization that responds to sign invasions, this afflux of signs, differently. I'm sure everyone here does it drastically differently than the last. That's fine. And each person following the contours of ways of reacting. This is, again, not an authentic selfhood, but instead the differential of reaction that is imposing itself. Identity as reacting patterns. Yeah, that's probably how I'd phrase that. It's identity as reacting powers. They're kind of talking about the default mode network, it seems, reminded of arc writing fused with weak Sepper-Whorf. It's different than Sepper-Whorf. So Sepper-Whorf is even if we talk about the weak form. So there's this idea. Sorry, anytime we mention something that like has a hyphen in it with two capitals, it's important to sort of say what's happening. So everyone else is like, what the fuck? Hey, I think language changes us and that culture defines us. Oh, wow, that's brilliant. No, I mean language literally makes it so we understand what can and can't happen. Oh, how so? And then you go down the road where the way that English, for example, is written or structured versus French, and it's very simple, creates a different type of subjectivity. That's more a grammatical syntax thing. Generally, when I understand Sapir-Whorf and people are going through it, it isn't drastically different in surface things. But when we're talking about this here, it's less the structure of all of those signs and more the signs themselves and how they are invaded and how the reaction happens with them. It would actually be an interesting discussion to have after this. I don't want to get too deep into it, but it is kind of talking about this, and it's really interesting. Fair is more holistically semiotic than semantic. I think so. But again, I mean, look, there's a lot of versions of Saber. Like I've seen really hardline versions of Sapir-Whorf that's like, because this language doesn't have X, they don't, like dumb shit. I've seen really dumb shit fucking versions of like, oh no, the Eskimos have so many words of snow because it's important. It's like, no, they have words because they needed different words for different things because they exist in different ways. So it's like, so it's going to vary, but it's an interesting discussion because there's a difference between this sort of semantic structure or the signs. And he's going a Saussurian sense. The thing that Klossowski is not really talking about, and he will at some point, and that I think Deleuze and Guattari really run with is tossing out Saussure and bringing in Yamslev. The moment that semiotic shift is made inside of their works, it completely changes how all of this functions. It says, also to turn it into an intelligible thing you can experience is already what we're talking about. I mean, exactly. It's the residue as a thing, right? The singular pattern of drive organization responds to the sign invasion differently, and the residue takes on the configuration of the impulsive movement characteristic of each person. So there is a contingent response, but again, not a consistent subject. This then is our consciousness, and that's what he's referring to here. This is our consciousness, and I'm putting that in big fucking quotes because he is too. The phrasing here is really specific. The consciousness is to Klossowski, and for him, Nietzsche, a residue of external signs configured by the impulsive reactivity that they're invading. This is the definition for him. It's important. So put a pin in that one. So where does this leave our unconscious? We cannot even look for it in our dreams. Because that's kind of the kind of runs with this. He's going to explain why. I'm just going to burn through the rest of this. We'll get to the next little part. The reason he's mentioning dreams is because, I mean, everyone here is a person. You're aware of dream analysis as a thing, or I had a dream. Oh, it must mean this and this and this because my unconscious is trying to tell me something. You've probably done this. If you haven't done it, you most certainly know someone who has. You might even know people like I do who have had dreams and actually been angry at people for things they did in their dreams. That's a thing. But to continue, for here again, if everything on the other side of the waking state were reconstructed, this would simply be the same system of signs of the everyday code being put to a different use. The short version, dreams don't have their own language. They don't have their own sign. Dreams don't access the impulsive designations. That doesn't know. They're not using they're using everyday signs differently than normal. The connections and linkages are different, sure, but it's still the same system of signs of the everyday code, just put to different use. This is not a latent or manifest structure, which is what Freud has, this idea of a single code under, the idea of like multiple codes, that you have this latent structure or manifestations of the structure. No. It's a single code under alternative operating rules. You might say the normative versus the schiz, you could say. Deleuze owes a lot to Klossowski and doesn't get nearly enough credit, sadly. Because this is the idea. It's in Anti-Oedipus, straight up, dreams are not depth access. They are not some inner thing that if only we could get to. Dreams are surface productions. Like it's an odd organization of particular signifiers. Basically. Yeah. Now, we're only going to do one paragraph today. That's going to be a whole thing. It is because of the difference between this use and the use that prevails in the waking state that we can more or less recall our dreams afterwards, relate the strange words or the words of strange banality that are offered there through us or through other figures. I did say strange worlds. I think it works still well, but it's intended to be words for a reason, because that's what he's saying. Is like, if you went to a place that wasn't built on the same structures as this other place, you couldn't talk about that structure here. It's a fucking basic argument. This is why they're separating. He's talking through why we separate the conscious and the unconscious is because this structure works this way. This is actually different language. It's a different language as a thing. But dreams use that language. They use it in fucking weird ways, but you can still describe stuff. You can still go, oh, it was weird. I was a bird with a chocolate bar head, and all these birds were trying to eat my head. That thing, that is still this. It's still this. It's dream recall, dream description requires commensurability between the worlds. And so it's the same code. It has to be. If dreams were another system, you would be unable to translate them. It would be like going into a foreign country and having someone say something to you and then relate that to someone else. You don't have a fucking, well, they said some things. It's as far as you would go. It still relies on that code. The strange words, the strange banality. It's not that this stuff's alien. That's the point, but it's unexpected operations. Right, August. Even in my example, it's still enunciable. Exactly. It's still operating by this structure, these codes, this everyday system on the other side. Still doing that. And that strange banality offered there through us or through other figures. Great wording here. This is, when you talk to people about, how does the ego work in dreams? How does your subjectivity exist in a dream? It is, people will say things like, I was me, but I wasn't. And I was also my teacher. And also you were there, but it wasn't you. It was someone else. That makes no sense in ours. But wait, that actually is revealing. This is the thing. Our subjectivity in real life works this way. It's the thing. But in dreams, it's because things are discordant and playing with each other differently. The dream ego is not like some more sovereign version that's more true. It's actually just the same as the waking ego. But figures and ourselves become sort of any position within the sign circulation. There's not a substantial identity that I have. Instead, I am that bird, but also my teacher. This is how people talk about these things. If you've ever had a dream, this is, you know that feeling where you're like, I was myself, but I was also a Deadpool, and we were walking through the forest on Endor. I like whatever, but then I wasn't there, and then the trees were alive, and also I was inside of my high school classroom. Whatever it is, these signs, same thing, but the lack of structure, the way that they interplay, is also revealing. Hint, hint. Also revealing. Also revealing. Moreover, in the waking state, we are capable of uttering things of the same type, whether in jest or through fatigue or through some other disturbance. The crazy shit in dreams, we also can say. Like, the idea that there is a categorical difference between waking and sleeping state or dreaming state. He's like, hey, we can say that stuff. There are people who make dreams come to life or whose consciousness in the waking world is as wild as anyone's dreams. I haven't, myself, it's been 20 years since I had a very strange dream. Once in a while it happens. It's amazing. Vast majority of my dreams are dealing with trauma, which is not great. But that thing of like how it's described or what happens, these are things I can talk about in the real. I can talk about this stuff. I can still come up with these things. It's not like it's impossible. That we do it through slips of the tongue. We do it through jokes or clever writing or being drunk or high or on LSD or being super, super tired. You still perform the same semiotic operations as dreams. It's a different break in the process. If you're feverish, if you're ill, if you're coming in and out of the twilight of being in surgery, like the way that the world works and all of these things, they want to dissolve. He's dissolving the idea of like sleeping, waking, that there's a difference there even, because there's not. Dreams don't have special access to some part of us. No, stop that. It is instead that everyday speech actually has dream logic under certain conditions. So that's not really two separate categories. We just separate them. Why do we do that? Well, they kind of talked about this. So when someone tells us we are dreaming out loud, daydreaming, it means that something impulsive has shaken or upset the code of everyday signs. We've been surprised by our unconscious. Other people will recognize and want to critique of AI. If I'm talking to August and I start absolutely talking about nonsense, because I'm just putting stuff together and it's like, and August will go, hey, man, you're a little crazy. It's like dreaming out loud. You're daydreaming. You're inside your own head. That other people will be able to recognize it far faster than we do. Right? But that thing that has happened, something impulsive has shaken the code. This impulsive system underneath it is going to disturb the code of everyday functioning. This is not unconscious breakthroughs or content that is emerging or meaning. This is a systemic interference that happens. And We are surprised by our unconscious. This is an unconscious experience. This is not psychoanalytic as a model. This is not any of that shit. This is not that. They say, but this is nothing. Even for someone to say this to us, the use of everyday signs is required by the interlocutor, even if it is a psychiatrist. The code disturbance requires the code. You can't, even in the moments of breakdown, you can't get away from that code, that everyday code, that the string of semiotic languages of things. You cannot get away from it. In psychiatrists dealing with someone who's completely manic or anything else, there's the institutional version of this is still dealing with that code. The setup is here. The therapeutic situation, I went over on stream way too much yesterday, but the therapeutic situation is contaminated by the thing, infected by the thing it's looking to cure. It's still an economy of signs. Exactly. And no matter what, it's still an economy of signs. And this implies we are totally dependent on the everyday code, even when we let ourselves be surprised by our unconscious, which at the very least will learn how to use the code in order to play with it and twist it around as it pleases, even when we make fun of the psychiatrist and conceal our desire to be cured. Seeking unconscious thought through consciousness falsifies the unconscious thought. So it's this amazing thing we've been able to do. And if you want to get at like the core of why the traditional unconscious is kind of not seen by any of these guys, you can kind of talk, this is the thing. Hey, I want to understand the unconscious. I want to use consciousness to understand it. And so what you do is you kind of build up this whole semiotic structure that you claim on the other side is the unconscious. Promise it's there, but you've really just built the space for it almost as a negative space. And that's the thing. The impulsive system is itself not passive, but it will manipulate everyday code. It learns to manipulate code. It is strategically intelligent as a thing, right? This is Klossowski's simulacra, Nietzsche's masks. The ability for us to build out of this is something we do. And if we're empowered to, the ability for us to be subverting this, to play with it, twist it around as it pleases. And despite, as we make fun of psychiatrists, because they do constantly, the last phrase, the desire to be cured. This is code effects, the effects of the code. It is not natural effects. Conceal our desire to be cured. I just love it. It's a very anti-psychiatry message, but it's a very good one. Very well written, I think. Yes, it's one of the things I like that Deleuze does in a logical sense is he builds in, and we're going to see Klossowski do very much the same thing, slightly differently word-wise and how it functions. But for Deleuze, nonsense is sense. It comes together. These things come at once, and they build on each other, and they work together. There is no such thing as just nonsense or sense. It's these things are sort of categorically together, and so it's a really interesting read if you ever want that. Really interesting read. But we're getting towards the end. This is why the strange behavior that would be, in most cases, nothing but a ruse. But a ruse of what? So, the strange behavior that would result, the symptoms, the acting out, the setup is something, but it's a ruse. It's a play at, a performative, a ruse of something. But what is a ruse of? Again, it is not a subject executing a ruse. This is not purpose-based bullshit. This is intelligence without intellect, almost. And as Nietzsche talks about it being interpretations all the way down, that there is no true reality behind the code. This plays us into a specific place, that there is a ruse happening here. But if that's the case, then what is happening? How is this playing it? On rejecting the unconscious because it can only be referred to in conscious terms, isn't that kind of like the transcendental idealist rejecting? I read it as different, because the point they're making is less the rejection of there ever being a such thing, but that the construction of the unconscious and conscious dichotomy, the construction of that is actually just something that naturally happens within the normative sign creation process. So it is not that we actually have or experience an unconscious and we have that within us and that we have a consciousness. It's that the categories through which we're able to discuss ourselves have been so deeply influenced by the code structure that this was the sort of inevitable, necessary, like through necessity process and result. But we can go beyond it. We don't have to use this language, but it is sort of baseline in it. That our model of the unconscious is certainly not the actual unconscious. Well, that consciousness and unconsciousness is kind of the thing, because again, what's the difference? The difference at the core is responsibility and agency. Like, that is the thing that's set up. These are institutional outside requirements. So instead of saying unconscious or consciousness, what if instead we were to have a discussion and talk about the impulsive, right? Because that's the setups we're talking about here, is the impulsive on the one side, and then the sort of normative signification on the other, right? And this is the play that they're talking about, the way that these two come together. That's what he's trying to get at, is that it's not a real distinction that we have on one side the agent, and then on the other side we have the unconscious, which is, this truer depth of things. That's not for any of these guys. That's definitely not the thing. But instead, it's a different type of play. Yeah, it's specifically, it's being focused when we're talking about consciousness or unconscious, and that's why he defined it out and used it and talked about it in Freudian, Jungian, Lacanian terms. He's talking about it in that way, that there is a conscious and an unconscious. Those terms are their code. They can have all kinds of content. We can fuck with that. But he's being very particular when he writes that that's the setup. And that's the dichotomy he's wanted to take on. Would be how I'd phrase that. Yeah, I think so. Yeah, that works. Let me look one more time. Because we're about to go into the ruse, and the ruse is awesome. Let's see. Yeah, let's do the ruse, because I think it'll help. Because it's a ruse. It's nothing but a ruse. But a ruse of what? Well, the ruse consists in making us believe in the coexistences. I mean, this is fucking answering your question. I need to stop doing that. This is answering your question, responding to you directly, Reed, and you didn't even know that. Neither did I. The ruse consists in making us believe in the coexistence of a consciousness and an unconsciousness. For if the latter survives in us, our consciousness would merely be a capacity to enter into an exchange with the exteriority of the code of everyday signs. This capacity would amount to little more than receiving as much as possible, while giving as little as possible. But we have no need to retain the greater part of this code, for the simple reason that we will never give up anything whatsoever of our own depth. This is why he was using the economic argument earlier, by the way, and playing with it in that way. The ruse consists in making us believe in the coexistence of consciousness and unconsciousness. This is the ruse. The ruse is the binary. It is not that one is false and that we have a consciousness, but not an unconscious. No. It's that their coexistence as complementary categories itself is the ruse. This is not eliminating one or denying one. This is a denial of the structure itself, the relationship itself. The two do not form a coherent topology or system. Fuck off Freud. Fuck off Freud. There you go. Fuck off Freud. Fuck off Freud. And because this is a huge tradition. It's crazy. All these psychological, psychiatric, and normative positions, even behavioral science and other things, really plays into this idea of the unconscious and the conscious. These presume categories themselves that map onto a psychic reality, instead of being these institutional fictions.
Institutional fictions that created by science, right?
Yep.
By the science, because science are the infection. It's kind of like infecting these impulses. It's kind of like invading these impulses and wants to kind of like, I don't know, wants to kind of like explain everything between the dichotomy between consciousness and the unconscious. But this dichotomy is the ruse. What's the ruse in English? Part of my English, the ruse,
the ruse is the trick, the scam.
Yeah.
It's you have fallen for my ruse, ha 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 ha, kind of thing. You need to think of someone with a big giant mustache twirling it when they say it. Ah, yes, you've fallen for my ruse, because no one uses that term anymore. It's a good term, but it is something said by old villains. Yeah, and then, but they say, so, okay. For if the latter, unconsciousness, survives in us, our consciousness would merely be a capacity to enter into an exchange with the exteriority of the code of everyday signs. So, if the unconscious survives in us, then we have to redefine consciousness basically radically. Radically. It would merely be the capacity. It's a hell of a fucking line. Consciousness reduced from this sovereign agent, this perfectly responsible faculty, instead to an interface, a translating program, a translation process, a trading post economically between the unconscious system here, and the code, these incommensurable systems, which, by the way, is literally what they've been talking about for most of this. These systems are incommensurable, right? Code and the unconscious, the common social world and the unconscious. They're incommensurable systems at a base level. This is the thing. It is economic at the basis. This is an explicitly economic argument about this. Consciousness is an exchange economy. It is a market economy through functioning, through circulation, through living currency, as Klossowski would write, or the accursed share or Bataille's restricted economy. That's what the consciousness becomes. It is this exchange economy between these two elements that are incommensurate themselves. And that capacity would amount to little more than receiving as much as possible, giving as little as possible. Then economic play is maximizing input, minimizing output, maximizing input, having all of that extra profit. Profit, basically, is a hyper-defensive economic system. Consciousness is Ebenezer Scrooge, right? Receiving as much, giving as little. Your consciousness is the landlord of your unconscious. Because it's they're. I mean, that's what he's actually making this commentary. This is a restricted economy. This is not the open economy. This is a restricted economy. It's calculative. It is self-preserving. It is aimed at accumulation. It is that contrasted with an impulsive system's wasteful expenditure, excess, and sovereignty. There's a difference there. The as much and as little he's driving home over and over and over. But, he says, we have no need to retain the greater part of this code, for the simple reason that we will never give up anything whatsoever of our own depth. Oh, just fucking, oh, it's beautiful. Sorry. Oh, it's beautiful. Okay. So, this miser that we're talking about consciousness being, which is funny to talk about it as a landlord. It's actually the false model. This is the false model. This is the ruse, the bullshit. Because we do not actually need to internalize or memorize everyday signs. Why would consciousness need to maximize retention if we actually don't really retain that much? Right? Well, the explanation is simple reason. We never give up anything whatsoever of our own depth. Our depth, our impulsive system, actually never enters into exchange at all. It is not that we give minimally. There is nothing given. Your impulsive system is not expelled or expended. You do not lose it. We give nothing of depth.
So your impulsive system is like gold reserve.
No.
Right?
No. Well, maybe. It depends on how you mean that. Maybe.
Yeah.
Metaphors are tough. Metaphors are tough. It's more that the two systems actually don't communicate or exchange. Consciousness is actually not this interface between the depth of you and everyday code, because depth doesn't cross it. It's not really an interface. That you don't expend energy and have it disappear. The exchange and the vision of it and everything is actually superficial. It's not really there. It's signs circulating among themselves, producing this conscious element as residual effect, but the impulsive depths are untouched. They don't actually touch anything. They don't trade. There is no outside economy that sort of touches into it. It is consistent. It's its own thing. It's in the ruse, as they're talking about it, consciousness and the unconscious don't really. The ruse says that they sort of coexist as complementary terms, and that there's exchange. But they don't actually do this. There is no exchange. There is no translation. There's no communication between them. They're entirely incommensurable systems that occupy completely different ontological registers as a whole. This is not a way that enables a return of the repressed. Generally, we tend to think of the unconscious as we push things down into it, and someday it'll suffer or come out. No, there's nothing there. Repression assumes depth content can be translated into consciousness, but no, it never enters into translation. That's not how it works. It's not phenomenological, because there's no intentional arc from this pre-reflective to reflective areas. Consciousness doesn't emerge from or express depth directly. It's economic. The impulsive depth is like the general economy for Bataille, right? It is sovereign. It is excessive. It refuses and forbids and breaks the idea of calculation on its own. Quantification destroys it entirely. Consciousness is the restricted economy. It is calculating. It is retentive, but they do not interact. Consciousness operates in ignorance of the depth and falsifies it too. It's not just that it falsifies it, which is a sort of Nietzschean perspectivism, its interpretation all the way down. It's not that just it falsifies depth. It is that consciousness never even fucking touches it. They're ontologically different things. They don't even touch. They're not even there. The ruse is that there is traffic between them, when instead there's actually parallel non-communication between them.
What I understand from you is that, like, we should substitute another word for the unconscious, or we should get rid of it. Like, get rid of, like, the thing. Bewussten. Unbewussten. Get rid of it, like...
It's
totally.
not far from it. It's not far from the setup, because, okay, if the depths never enter exchange, then institutional power's apparent reach is actually illusory entirely. Like, just take that for what it is, because that's what he's saying. The impulsive system, the forces, are radically outside of any institutional system, untouched and wholly sovereign. Even as codes produce compliant conscious subjects that seem to be doing, no. We traditionally think of resistance politically as something that happens in consciousness because we are political subjects. Instead, resistance actually operates through impulsive eruptions that cannot be captured or translated by the institutional codes.
That's a big claim.
Yeah.
Like Lacan talked about that, and he said we can do that in seminar 1. But that's a big claim. We cannot do that. Like, we cannot capture these kind of things. So that's a big claim.
Yeah. Chapter 3 is this book is a lot. This book is a lot. It's a pretty radical kind of dualism. It's not a dualism, though. Like, that's what he's going through here is talking about the ruse and how it operates and plays. So when we have the subject that is within the realm of institutional code and determined by institutional code, the trick being played is that the unconscious is part of it. It's not. Why would it be part of that? The eruptions aren't part of that. They're not able to be translated into code. They're actually the very untranslatables that are what make things. As soon as something can be translated into code and played into it, that's just part of the normative system, isn't it? It can be captured by the institutional code.
I don't know if this is maybe a little too wacky of a way of looking at it, but is it kind of like the notion that maybe the unconscious is kind of like the body without organs and that it's not cut up into individual pieces yet? And when we start cutting it up and thinking of it in that way,
it's definitely not.
Okay.
BWO works significantly differently. And I think Daniel Smith, who did this translation, which is excellent, by the way, wrote a piece on the body without organs, which is in the QC. I'll find it and relink to it and drop it in. And actually does talk about how it relates to this, because Daniel Smith has done fucking amazing work. It's a little bit different than that, because there is an odd, just to go with August, there's an odd dualism that's happening here between surface and depth. That surface is basically the institutional and the depth is wholly sovereign, and these two never meet. Yes, you could say that as a dualism of sorts.
So with the notion of never meeting, is this like there's like no behavioral interaction between these two objects at all?
Oh, see, that's what would be the interaction? Like this would be the thing. So we would talk about like when I've got severe PTSD and I have repressed trauma from a horrible event, and so when I hear a balloon pop, depending on exactly the type of tone, it might make me burst into tears. It's happened before. It might make me lose my shit. This is the unconscious erupting into the conscious. Is it? Because I'm describing it and I'm talking about it. The eruption is the thing that can't be described into code. The unconscious can't be coded. It can't be built these things because the depth doesn't really give up anything.
Okay. I think so that
I'm going to just keep reading. We're doing more than 2 hours today.
Sure.
I've got to keep reading because this next little bit is a lot. And this gets into Nietzsche really, really fast here, but because he brings it back. We're taking a hell of a detour here, but yeah, it's a lot. When we talk about the two, it's a question of the eruption. So one might say, and again, this is the challenge with that binary of conscious and unconscious. Oh, the Freudian slip where he said, blah, blah, blah. That's just the unconscious coming through. It's like, really? Because the unconscious doesn't have a coded thing, doesn't have that ability. It's actually an almost unspeakable response or actions or whatever that can't be fully communicated into the social world. The unconscious is unaware of body, mind, individuals, anything. The unconscious is just forces. How could it possibly know or do things that it's interacting with on the conscious side? And this would be the thing. But again, just to go back, because we are totally dependent on everyday code, even when we let ourselves be surprised by the unconscious, which at the very least will learn how to use the code in order to play with it and twist it around as it pleases, even when we make fun of the psychiatrist and conceal our desire to be cured. This is why the strange behavior that would result would be, in most cases, nothing but a ruse. But a ruse of what? Well, the ruse consists in making us believe in the coexistence of a consciousness and unconsciousness. That's the ruse, is that there is a coexistence of these. Right? The dualism, at least as we're talking about it now, is the ruse of the code, which is the level at which consciousness engages or is produced. We're going to keep going. We're going to actually just keep going because this next little bit is, this is good. This stuff gets very good. Does anyone care if I just start charging ahead? Hello?
Go ahead.
Oh, cool. Making sure my internet didn't die. Jesus. Sorry, 2 seconds. Two seconds, sorry. As soon as I go over 2 hours, everything just becomes... I've kind of got some couple stuff to do. 1 second. Oh, frustrating. Oh, frustrating. I may not be able to keep going. Sorry. Now that I'm at 2 hours 10, I actually may need to be running. Kid and I are dropping off costumes to the protesters. If you're not aware, operationinflation.com. If you head over there, $35 a pop. We don't make money on this. It's an art project is what we're calling it. And it's pretty simple. We just take your $35. We buy a costume. They tend to be $32 plus batteries. And we're dropping them off at protesters. So that way it looks really different than Fox News can make it look. Because how many unicorns standing outside of ICE before they start getting pepper sprayed before it starts looking insane? Pretty fast, actually. So we've got that. I've got to do that. I fucking forgot. I'm just trying to see if I can maybe take a few minutes. 1 second. I may have to go. All right. We will continue next week. We will continue next week. Apologies, everyone. I'd love to keep going, but it's a whole thing. OperationInflation.com if you're interested. I am at my Amazon. Honest to God, my Amazon queue is going to be completely because they just finished Amazon Prime week, so it's this like. So I took advantage. We've had 26 purchased through it. 1 second. Amazon just sent me a notice. I've got things to take care of. It's like, hey, we don't believe this is you ordering fucking 50 of these goddamn costumes. I do not blame you. Oh god, I've got to re-enter the entire card number. Wonderful. How's that? What the fuck? All right, I've got to take care of this. With that, I'm gonna let's see. We'll move me back to here, and we'll say, what is going on? Is anyone live? Who can I raid over to? I think we're figuring out Operation Inflation. You can watch Kid. We're going to be delivering. I think we're going to be streaming on his. I don't know. I might be streaming too. We might be doing a little bit more operational security than that, but who knows? But regardless, how are they inflated? Is there a small compressor? So I have a big Oogie Boogie one, which I'm going to be taking with me so I can wear. And what they do is it's very simple. The entire thing is fairly sealed in. It's actually fairly sealed in. Not perfectly, more like a camping tent, like a good tent. But instead of having like netting, it has clear plastic, even if there's openings. And then there's one hole with like a PC fan, like a little 50 millimeter fan that just basically runs and it just sucks air straight in. There's versions of this, but it's basically just a fan that's pulling air in constantly. And that's it. And it's just enough to keep it going. And it's pretty hilarious. So with that, I'm going to be heading out. Be watching for the stream. Who knows? This weekend, I'm going to be doing a couple streams, and we're going to be starting our Kintsugi project. And then, yeah, join the QC, discord.gg/DGQC. Got a lot of shit going on. If you want to support what I'm doing and you think it's not the worst waste of your time and money, if you can drop in and head over to patreon.com/DGQC and once a month, a little bit of coffee here and there, $5, $3. I'll always appreciate it. Always would be lovely. So thank all of you. And